Pictures of you, pictures of me, hung upon your wall for the world to see. Pictures of you, pictures of me, remind us all of what we could have been. Pictures of you, pictures of me, hung upon your...
Relive every moment true to life with True Capture technology, only from Canon.
And Travel Writers Association, New Zealand Travel Communicators, and Australian Journalists Association, and the Society for Women Writers. My Lord, that's a list and a half. She's currently a judge for some of the tourism awards, which is fabulous, and she's also got a blog. So if you want to write these down, briarstravelbeat.com.au is her blog, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. And she's also done the Darling River Run. So I welcome Briar Jensen.
Thank you very much, Laurie, for that lovely introduction. Okay. So today specifically is how to work with media and what makes an effective FML. Now, I'm sorry if any of you were in the Hunter Valley last year and heard this, because it will be the same. So I'm pretty sure you know what the term FML means, which is short for familiarisation trip. So how many of you here have run a familiarisation trip? Okay, a couple, which is great. Okay, so for this presentation, it's not just based on my feedback, but also I contacted editors, other journalists, both freelancers and staff journalists, just to get a cross-section of their opinions on what makes a good FML. Now, you should have or will receive notes from this presentation, but feel free to add to those as I go along. Okay, let's put this down for a second. I just want to start off with a little scenario. Just imagine that you're a travel writer. It's the day before a FML and you're rushing to get stories off, pitch articles to editors, etc. before you leave. Then there's the household chores you've got to do, you've got to iron some clothes, you've got to pay the bills, etc. It's well after 10 p.m. before you get a chance to pack. You're up at 4:30 a.m. to get to the airport in order to catch your flight. You arrive at the destination mid-morning, but unfortunately your room isn't yet available, so you can't freshen up. Your host herds you onto a minibus with other equally unfresh journalists you've never met before. You're taken to a wine tasting, a 3-course lunch, another wine and cheese tasting, a chocolate factory where they insist you try their hot chocolate as well as a sample of their rich delicacies. Then it's on to a brewery where the brewer expects you to sample all 7 brews, and he gets a bit offended when you only take a sip from each glass. Back on the bus, which is now getting decidedly whiffy, your host announces that she's organised a treat before dinner. You're off to visit a local spa for a full-body massage. But unfortunately, they don't have enough rooms for everyone, so you'll have to pair up for a couples massage with someone you've just met today. But she says, "Oh, I didn't think you would mind getting naked with each other." Oh, same sex, of course, though. Following the massages, you head back to the hotel, desperate for some private downtime to write up your notes and sort out your images, only to learn that the hotel has only provided twin accommodation. So now you're expected to sleep with one of those people you only just met today. It's then you remember you forgot to pack your PJs. You're given half an hour to get ready for dinner. Scarcely enough time to plug in all your chargers, let alone do anything else. Too bad it's not enough time to blog or post about today's activities. Your hostess thoughtfully didn't think you'd want the full 9-course degustation menu and has only booked a 3-course dinner, but afterwards wants to show you the local, the town's newest nightclub, where the barman insists you try his specialty cocktails. It's after midnight when your host drops you back at the hotel, where she informs you there's been a slight change for tomorrow's itinerary. We'll be leaving at 7 a.m. instead of 9, but I didn't think you'd mind. Okay, I've taken a few liberties with that, but everything on that itinerary has actually occurred to me. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're feeling rushed, if you're feeling tired, and quite possibly a little bit grumpy, then you're not going to write the best story. So, how to create a good famille. Oh, sorry. Okay, the keys to a successful famille are research and planning, a detailed but a flexible itinerary, and a sense of fun. A famille should be enjoyable for everyone involved, both the participants and the hosts, and that will show in the stories. And a successful famille will generate editorial coverage over a long period of time. Okay, so research and planning. Define what it is that you want to promote and have a central theme. So it can be something like a general, like adventure travel, or it can be something more specific, like Pinot and pork pies, if you're trying to do a wine and food famille. But try not to keep running the same famille over and over again. You need to find new story leads, unusual experiences, interesting characters and new properties. There has to be a reason for publication. You can't expect to just have your destination written about again and again if you're not offering something different. Now just think about the Gold Coast, for example. The theme parks are probably the biggest thing on the Gold Coast, but stories can't be written on that all the time. There has to be something else to write about. So then think content and context. You can't write about a town or a city if you only see inside the museums. So your content must support your theme, and try and make it as unique as you can, and include hands-on activities for a memorable experience. Try and canvass journalists' interests before they come. So as well as what you want to promote, ask the journalists what they like to do. Are they interested in soft adventure? Are they interested in art? Are they looking for a great character story? And use that to help define your itinerary. Are you going to run a group famille, or are you just going to have individual journalists? A group means that you're able to host several publications at once, which is great, but then they're all getting the same experience. Individuals also have more flexibility to follow story angles, and if it's a freelancer, then they're likely to write multiple stories anyway. Just an example, I went to Kyneton outside Melbourne. I was only staying a couple of nights. I went to different accommodation providers, different lunch venues, did a lot of things along the way, and out of that short visit I was able to get 6 stories in 5 different publications. Okay, are you going to host the famille, or are you going to let it be self-guided? Again, it's up to your resources. Do you have someone to host it, or would you rather they just had a hire car and drove themselves around? One of the most important things is targeting the publications. You need to make a decision on where you want to see editorial. Do you want to see it in newspapers, magazines, online, or all of those? And are you targeting international, national, metropolitan, local, consumer, trade, or subscription magazines? And don't forget that most unique magazines, custom publications, whether it be a car magazine, a boating magazine, a magazine about a particular animal, goats, they nearly always have a travel page, and that's a targeted audience. So that can often generate a lot of business. Journalistic mix. And this can be quite difficult for you guys to work out, and that's where networking and talking to people like Laurie becomes important, so you can sort out a good mix. Now, do you want a mix of staff writers, that's writers that work specifically for a publication, and some freelancers, or do you just want one or the other? A staff writer will probably guarantee you, I say probably, but usually guarantee you at least one story, possibly 2 or 3 in that publication, but then that will be it. They'll be moving on to something else. Whereas a freelancer's livelihood is based on selling as many stories as they can, and so they will usually sell across a variety of publications, and you'll get probably a greater return from that. But if you have a staff member from that publication, then you're guaranteed to be able to get into that publication, whereas a freelancer may not be able to tell you exactly which publications they will be able to sell the stories to, because it often depends on the angles that you pick up on a particular trip. Try and in this journalistic mix, if you can, get a mix of males and females and a mix of personalities. Again, quite difficult until you build up a list of people that you know and respect, but once again, networking and finding out about those is very important. Just be also aware that if you book a staff writer from a newspaper or magazine, they may pull out at the last moment because editorial changes have occurred. It might be that they have suddenly a big project on that they have to do, so they're pulled at the last minute. So it's often a good idea to have a sort of backup list of people that you can contact at the last minute. I often get calls saying, "Oh, are you free next week to do something?" Try and have a list of people who are able to pop out at short notice. Another thing is whether to invite partners or not. Now, partners will obviously not be very appropriate on a group famille, but on a solo famille, it can often be an added advantage. Now, just think about it. If you're sending someone off to a new resort that's just been established in your area, and one of the key things is the romantic getaway. Well, I mean, it's much easier to write about a romantic getaway when you've got a partner with you than it is lolling about in a spa drinking champagne by yourself. It might also be that an adventure, going cycling is much more fun to have someone along with you. I do quite a bit of work in New Zealand, and I have a girlfriend over there who often ring up and say, "Hey, can you join me on this?" Not only does it make it more enjoyable, but I have another perspective on the experience. While I have my own view on how things have gone and what I've enjoyed, she has a totally different view, so that can add to the story. As I mentioned, expect some cancellations, and where possible, be ready for that. Okay, moving on to scheduling. Do provide as much notice as is possible for a famille that you're going to run. Publications and freelancers often work months in advance, so if you want to secure someone, try and lock those dates in. In order to attract people, you need to provide a draft itinerary. This allows potential participants to make an informed choice about whether the trip is right for them, and gives particularly freelancers the opportunity to try and pitch some of those story ideas. But do ensure that all you put in your draft itinerary is deliverable. Don't put in a teaser that you know you can't deliver, because you will have people pull out at the last minute if you've offered something which you can no longer deliver. And also facilitate what you can for the journalists, visas and permits, especially if you're hosting an overseas journalist. They may not know what is required in the way of visas. They may not realise that permits are required to get into some national parks. So do all that background and have that organised for them. Okay, the itinerary. Now, as I said, try and deliver the itinerary as early as possible. Firstly, the draft, and then your final itinerary. The itinerary is used for lots of things. Passing on to family at home, so they've got your contact details. I also use it for packing, what sort of activities I'll be doing, and what I'll need to pack. So delivering the itinerary the night before, or handed out at the airport, like has happened in some instances, is not acceptable. You really need to get that out as soon as possible. Make it as detailed as possible too, and always include host contact details, and especially after hours details. Things can go wrong, as a good example here this weekend. Flights are delayed, roads are closed, so a journalist may need to get in contact with you, say, sorry guy, I'm stuck in Barrier Highway, whatever. Also include websites as well. So if you've got list of accommodation, include the links to those accommodation providers so the journalist can go in and have a look and see what the accommodation is like. Also, any research links at the end of the itinerary is great to help us do our research before we arrive. And also weather links are a fantastic idea. And perhaps if I'd checked the weather before I came to Broken Hill, I might have put in some gumboots instead of all the thongs and sandals I've got with me. And also include any specific instructions, particularly for solo journalists. You want them to meet someone somewhere, be specific. I'll give you an example. I was in Noumea recently. I was to join a yacht race, and the itinerary said, go to the marina and find this bloke on this boat. So I get to the marina, and like every boat in New Caledonia is in this marina. There are thousands of boats. Well, some people had heard of the race. They had no idea where it was starting from. Yes, they'd heard of that guy, but they'd never heard of that boat. So we spent about 40 minutes racing around this marina trying to find the boat, just got on at the last minute as they went to leave. So we could have missed that, and the next day the following journalists did miss it. So please be specific with any instructions. Another thing for your itinerary is guidelines for dress code as well. If you're expecting someone to attend a formal function, put in there that it's black tie, or if the whole meal is going to be sort of a bit adventurous and outdoors, make sure you specify that they'll need their hiking boots. I was invited to Disneyland in Hong Kong, and on the itinerary it said 2 cocktail parties. So it was their 5th anniversary, so I put in a couple of little strappy dresses. First night was fantastic, so it was inside a hotel. The second night was actually in the park, on the rides, in the middle of winter, and I'm totally inappropriately dressed. I've got my raincoat over the top of what I'm wearing. As I said before, only include authentic experiences. And by this I mean experiences that the reader can undertake. It's no good organising a behind-the-scenes tour if that's not something that the reader can do. Now, there might be certain times when a behind-the-scenes tour is important. It might be someone has decided they want to do an in-depth story on a particular location, or they might want to do a background story on the personality. Okay, in that instance, it might be worthwhile, but that's something you would discuss with the journalist. Generally, what we want is what the tourist, our reader, can experience. Also detail what expenses are included in the meal and what isn't. It's very embarrassing when you get up from a meal to, should I be paying for this? Do I just pay for my drinks or the whole meal? It can also be very embarrassing for you if the journalists are supposed to pay and one of them just gets up and walks out and suddenly you're left with the bill. So be specific in the itinerary, what is covered and what isn't. Now, don't schedule too tightly. The itinerary should be a framework. It's not set in stone. Don't get in your car and measure how many minutes it takes to drive from Broken Hill to Pro Heart Gallery, for example, and detail that in the itinerary. It needs to be flexible. You need to allow time for journalists to take notes, photos, stop and talk to locals, or follow different story angles. And when I talk about flexibility, I mean not just for the journalists, but also for the hosts. It might be a particular barman or a proprietor has an interest in something. It might be trains, and then the journalist, well, you know, I've got an interest in trains. Oh, well, you know, out the back in my paddock, I've got a couple of old carriages. So, you know, let that spontaneity happen and let the journalists follow their interests. It might also be that you've got professional photographers on a trip, as well as those of us who have to take our own photos. You know, maybe offer at sunset drinks for the writers, and then take the photographers to a gorgeous location to get some sunset photographs. Again, things like dinner, adjust dinner times if necessary. It might be that you've been running late during the day and dinner's, you know, only half an hour away. Is it possible to move that out an extra half an hour so that people have got time to go and get changed, download some photos, etc. Or if you find your whole group is absolutely exhausted, you've had a really great day, dinner's not for a couple of hours, everyone's tired, can you bring dinner forward maybe so that you can get an earlier night? Also think about, even on a group for meal, tailoring some options. So let's say you've got someone from a golf magazine, someone from a luxury travel magazine, and just a general newspaper. Think about offering one morning a round of golf, a spa treatment, or an art trail, and let the journalists choose what they'd like to do. That way you might get all of those covered, and that will certainly give the journalists different story angles. Now, the key thing to any famil is include free time. It's the single most important factor, and it applies to everyone, whether they're a staff writer, an editor, or a freelancer. At least 1 to 2 hours before dinner, at the least. Now you might think, God, what do they want 2 hours before dinner for? But you've got to remember that we're often writing up notes, we're downloading photos, we're using social media, we're filing copies. For example, Travel Daily, an online site, it's called Travel Daily. They have to file stories daily. So give them the opportunity to get that done before dinner so they can relax, rather than having to go back and be filing stories at midnight. What you can also do is offer at the last stop of the day, let's say it's in town at a local pub, you can say to the journalist, look, those of you who'd like to stay here and relax can, and anyone else who'd like to go back to the hotel, it's only a short walk, so that they've got the option of doing that. And try, if you can, to offer at least half a day at the end of a famil, maybe even a day if you can. That just gives people the opportunity to follow up any leads that they may have come across while they've been on the famil, or they might have met someone that they'd like to go back and interview and do a more in-depth personal story. In that instance, try and, it's probably not so appropriate in the outback, but try and offer them like a transport pass if you're in a town and you've got a bus pass that lasts the whole day, so that they can get themselves around the area. That's a great asset. Okay, moving on to transport. Do include airline and airport taxes if you can. That's really appreciated by the writers. Particularly as a freelance writer, it's not a particularly well-paid profession, and every little bit that you can help me out, I really appreciate. Even getting to the airport, a taxi for me to the airport's over $100 there and back. So starting off any trip, I'm already out of pocket that way. So if you can help out with any of those things, it's fantastic. Now, this is particularly important for when you're flying guests and especially your international guests, is request upgrades where possible, and also lounge access so that people can freshen up and work, particularly when it's on a long haul flight. And it just means your journalists will hit the ground running when they get here. Meet and greet where you can. Now, I know that's not always possible, but it's really nice when you perhaps land in an airport you haven't been to before and there's a friendly face saying, hi, welcome to my town. It just makes you feel good, and if you've got any questions that you've thought about during your trip, you can ask those and get off to a great start. But I do understand it's not always possible to do that, so make transfer arrangements if you can't do that. But once again, please make those specific. There's nothing worth saying, oh, you'll be met at the airport, or there's a transfer for you at the airport, and you're standing there waiting for the little plaque with your name on, as usually happens, and then after you've been there 15 or 20 minutes and the airport's emptied, you realise, okay, that wasn't quite the right instruction. Actually, I had to walk out of the airport, turn right, and down 200 metres was where I was supposed to meet the bus. So detailed instructions is very important. Moving on to accommodation. Now try and choose... Oops. Sorry guys. Try and choose new and interesting accommodation providers. It's a greater chance that they will actually be featured in a story. Now, if you choose a generic hotel, there's not much I can write about a generic hotel, and it will probably only get featured in the fact box. But if you put me in a great hotel with atmosphere, history, a new little B&B that's open, then I can perhaps work that into the story. Please, hotel inspections only on request. As I mentioned, there's not a lot I can write about a hotel, and I really don't need to see in the kitchen and every single room configuration in the hotel. So that's something that you should really only do if the journalist asks for it, or if you've got a really unique property where the owner wants to show you a few extra things. Do ask for early check-in if possible. We travel with laptops, cameras, as well as our normal bags. So it's great to be able to download or unload what you can in your accommodation first, and especially if you've had a long haul flight, it's great to freshen up before you get on the road. Accommodation in a central location is also great. I've been put up at the All Seasons here, and I can walk into town, I can walk around, except in this pouring rain, I'll use my hire car. But that just means if journalists have got a bit of time, then they can get out and about and do a few things. Okay, I've been given the hurry up here, so I'll move on. If you've got, and I know this is particularly appropriate for outback locations, where you've got lots of accommodation providers and you're trying to showcase as many as you can, if you've got a group for meal, put the in different accommodation. You might have 6, so put 2 and 3 lots of accommodation, and not only are you giving journalists a slightly different story angle, you're also covering more accommodation options. I mentioned this, if you can, single rooms, just from a practical factor. I'm travelling with, I think, 4 or 5 chargers at the moment. You're in a room with 1 plug. It's not even enough for me to charge my stuff, let alone another journalist. And we often need that, you've been travelling with people all day long, you just need that headspace, have some time to yourself, download your photos, do whatever you need to do. Now, I understand that that's not always possible, so don't panic, but just in the itinerary, let people know that there will be staying in a sharer's quarters, for example, so the accommodation will be shared, or it might be that you want to showcase a great B&B cottage, and you'll be sharing the cottage with other people. I don't mind sharing a room, but I do like to know in advance, and so I can pack my PJs. Now, internet access, really, internet access should be included free of charge for your journalists, particularly nowadays with online access, social media, blogging. You can't expect them to be doing that if there's a hassle. You've got to run down to reception, try and work out the internet connection doesn't work, they haven't got the cables or whatever. You've wasted an enormous amount of time which could have been spent working. So ask the hotel accommodation provider to include internet access for your journalists, and if they won't, then consider including that cost in covering that for them. Okay. I have to whiz through this fairly quickly now. Meals. I don't want to sound ungrateful here, but there's only so much a person can eat before we start falling behind, falling asleep, and in some cases being sick. So do include breakfast with your accommodation, because that means we can get fed and out on the road quickly. But only 1 multi-course meal a day, please, and preferably make that in the evening, so we're not wasting time at lunchtime sitting down to a 5-course meal. and no long hosted lunches. Well, yes, it's nice to meet the town mayor. I hope they're not here today. There's not a lot of a story I can get out. Oh! I'll be pleased to meet you later. But having a really long lunch when you should be out and about, you're not wasting valuable time, but you're not using it to your best advantage. So if you do want to introduce some guests, I suggest you do that over an evening meal. And light lunches. Look, most of us here only have a light lunch at work, don't we? We don't go out for a 3-course lunch. So we're working journalists, it's exactly the same. We like a light lunch too. And even consider a picnic. If you're out on the road, en route somewhere, you've got a nice park you want to showcase, consider having a picnic lunch. And no consecutive late night finishes, or at least make them optional. It's tiring being on the road, and if you're out till midnight every night, you're really not at your best. And please don't take journalists out on a pub crawl, bring them home at 3 a.m. and then expect them to be on time next morning, because they won't. Okay, press kits. Do try and provide press kits and maps at the start of a trip. Particularly road trips and outback. I did the Darling River Run a while ago. I love to have that map on my lap as our Silver City bus is taking us. I want to know what road I'm on, what direction we're going. Because if I want to recount that, I need to know those details. Don't give me the map at the end. Okay, if you have got a bulky press kit, or you've got a gift, perhaps it might be you've had an artist donate a book or photography book or something on the area, and you want to give that as a gift to the journalist, offer the option of posting that to them rather than them having to carry it around, because it can get very, very bulky. And, where possible these days, use USBs and CDs or DVDs for images in particular, and press kits as well. There's two sides of that story. It's great to have it on a USB, but I like a bit of paper too sometimes, so I might be picking up stuff as I go around. So, maybe ask the journalists what they prefer. Okay, accompanying hosts. What is expected of you? Organise and facilitate. That's your role. But, I don't mean to be rude here, but don't micromanage, hover, and talk incessantly. We're the journalists, we're the ones that are looking for the story. It's up to us to find those angles. Sure, we need your help, you need to point us in the right direction, but I can't absorb what's going on around me if you're constantly in my ear the whole time. We need to get a feel for the place. We need to be able to listen to the bird song. We want to be able to smell the eucalypts, whatever it is. So we need some time to concentrate on those things. But certainly do allow for serendipitous happenings. This is absolutely fantastic. You might be having lunch and a local artist walks in. Well, grab that opportunity, introduce them to the journalists, and allow a bit of time for conversation. And let journalists follow up their own interests. It might be something someone has said has piqued an angle, and they think, wow, I can go back to that and get a great story out of that. So don't try to impose your interests on other people. You might love the local craft museum, but might only be 10 minutes or half an hour is enough for the journalist. They need to get out and about and look at other things. Pace yourself to the group and be inclusive. You might find that you've got a very pacey group, they move fairly quickly, they get their information and move on. Or you might find you've got some, maybe they're more mature journalists and they, a little bit slower, walking around town, they want to take their time. Try and sort of, if you can, cover both of those groups if you've got two hosts, or you can send the more adventurous ones off by themselves and they can look after themselves. Don't ever pander to one particular journalist over another though. it might sound obvious, but just because you love Vogue Living, don't you sort of pander to the Vogue Living editor the whole time and to the exclusion of other members of the team. Follow up on information that's requested. Now, you can't be expected to know everything, and we understand that. But if you don't know something, follow up. Ask other members of your visitor information team. Get online, find the information and get back to the journalist, even if it's with a link or a phone number for someone else that they can follow up. Now, the last one's a tricky one, and that's deal with problems promptly. Don't let them escalate. Now, this can be quite difficult, and those of you who have hosted a famil might have your own examples. If you've got a group famil, invariably someone will always be late, and usually it's the same person every single day, which is extremely frustrating, not only for you guys, but for the rest of us journalists who've made the effort to get there on time. Talk to that person privately, say, hey, come on, we really need to be on time tomorrow. Another example might be the overconsumption of alcohol. It's another tricky one that you need to be careful with, but often just a quiet word on the side can be very helpful. Okay, feedback. I think one of the most important things when you have run a famil is to ask for feedback. This probably best done after the event, a week or so later, and certainly it's something you can do online via an email. When a journalist might feel more confident in actually saying what they felt rather than in your face. It's an opportunity to determine what did work and what didn't work, and obviously use that information to adjust your itineraries for next time. Okay, what can you expect after running one of these famils? Now, your editorial coverage. Just be aware that it can take a considerable amount of time before stories are published. Now, if you've got a newspaper that works weekly, then sure, you might actually be able to see a story within a few days' time. Online, you might even be able to see a story when the famil is still underway. But for magazines, particularly international magazines, it can be months and possibly even years before you receive the results of those famils. So that's where the mix of journalists comes in again. So you've got some staff writers, you've got some online writers, you've got writers that write for newspapers and writers that write for magazines. With luck, if you've chosen well, you'll be able to get coverage over a long period of time, from immediately right through to several years later. Expect your journalists to alert you to when the stories are appearing, and often that will be through the Tourist Bureau. Will alert them and then they can let you know. And yeah, do expect a copy. You should by all means expect it, and use that. Put it on your website, link to it on social media as well. So really get as much benefit out of that as you can. Okay, am I getting the wind up now? Right. Okay, references. Now on the handout, I've got a couple of references for you. One is another fellow journalist and PR, Rachel Oakes-Ash. She's got a blog, Pitch It To Me. I've made details here. She's got a couple of great posts. One is Time is Money for a Journalist, and the other one is Trust Me, I'm a Journo, which is how do you tell if a journalist is legitimate when they have approached you. The second is, as Laurie mentioned, the Australian Society of Travel Writers, of which I'm a committee member. This is a organisation where members must substantiate their output. So, for example, all our members must be practising journalists, and they must create a certain number of words a year to become members. So if you're trying to work out who am I going to invite, who's going to do a good job, start there, because those members, are going to produce the goods for you. And as Laurie mentioned, my details are there on the sheet. So I forgot to put my Facebook on, I don't know why. Anyway, okay. Now, some of you may have noticed a bit of a theme with the images through today, and I hope you've all been able to see them, standing in front of them. These are all images from a Darling River Run famil I did with Outback New South Wales Tourism a couple of years ago, and they have very kindly supplied me with the details. They had 3 famils with a total of 14 journalists, and that covered magazines from the newspapers from Sydney Morning Herald, Sun Herald, Daily Telegraph, Courier Mail, Australian Traveller, Open Road, etc. From those 3 for Mills, the equivalent in advertising rates they generated over $5.4 million in publicity. So it just goes to show, and I think the story's still coming from that, so it would be even greater than that. So you can see how a bit of effort can certainly bring you huge rewards. So I'd just like to thank Outback New South Wales Tourism for providing those results. Okay, as travel journalists, we are privileged to travel as much as we do, and we're certainly grateful for the support that we receive from guys like you. So I'd just like to say a personal thank you for behalf of my colleagues for what you do for us. And certainly I hope that you've found what I've talked about here today helpful, and if you've got any questions, we probably haven't got time now, but I'll hang around for a while, and perhaps over lunch if you'd like to ask me anything, please feel free to. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. Here's a bulky gift for you. Thanks so much. And obviously now we're just about to break for lunch, and I can assure you the eagle has landed. We have our speakers have arrived, and yeah, we're going to continue with our updated agenda. So we have all the content for you that we planned, which is great. But a quick thank you to our sponsors. I can't say enough how thankful we are to all of you, especially CountryLink, to IBA, which is Indigenous Businesses of Australia, Regional Development Australia, Pack2Go, which is the mobile phone developers, Broken Hill City Council, Club Legion for helping us with the room hire here, and obviously Emeroo Cottages for supplying some of the speaker accommodation. So thank you to all of those guys for your support. Lunches now, if you haven't put your name on one of the concurrent lists, please do so you don't miss out on your choice. And just a reminder, Sean, did you want to say about the shuttle tonight, where it's going to start and end, or are you happy for me to?
No, you're fine.
Yeah, okay, so we decided Silverhaven first?
Yep.
Okay, so 6:30, Silverhaven Motel?
Here then there.
Oh, here then next, sorry. 6:30, Club Legion. Yep, this is the shuttle to dinner. 6:40, did we work out Silverhaven? 6:45, the Astra. 6:50, Desert Sands. And then to the club. Now there is a special shuttle for people in South Broken Hill. You've been talked about that, yes? So you have your own chauffeur. So if you haven't spoken to Heather, speak to Heather because she's your chauffeur this evening, okay? So if there's anyone that's not being included there in that shuttle delivery, please let us know. But please enjoy lunch, network, do everything you need to do, and then come back for the start of our next session at 1:30. Thank you.